This video is powered by the pros at Pascal Air Plumbing and Electric. Arkansas owned, Arkansas operated. GoPascal.com.
We get to talk with Connor O'Gara, national columnist, Saturday Down South. And Connor, all the things that happened over the weekend, college football, Army-Navy, great game, Heisman Trophy awarded. We got our All-American teams have been announced. Bowl season starting on Friday. All of that right now is just taking a total back seat to the health and condition of Mike Leach, somebody that I know you've written about at extensive length. So it's a tough day for those who follow college football closely and appreciate one of the really true personalities and one of the great coaches in the game.
Yeah, it'd be really hard to, and I don't mean to say this in the past tense without knowing the full extent of what he's currently going through, but it'd be really difficult to come up with a list of more than 5 people who have had a bigger impact on the sport of college football in the 21st century. Like, if you're coming up with that list, Mike Leach is on it, and not just because he was really entertaining to listen to at press conferences, but because of what his offense has been in this sport. And you know, how does change come? It comes from people who are willing to think differently. And Mike Leach, you know, sometimes to a fault, but, you know, to his credit, did that for so much of his career. And so to see this all of a sudden happen over the weekend where you're just like, wait a minute, what? Like, this situation just kind of came out of nowhere. I think it caught a lot of people by surprise. And now we're just kind of left wondering, like, all right, so what's the aftermath going to be if he's able to pull through, and what would that look like? And there are just so many questions that I think a lot of people have. But, you know, this last 24 hours, I think it's been a good time for those of us who have studied and watched the sport and watched the impact that Mike Leach has had to be able to appreciate those things. And I know I find myself, like, earlier today, I'm going back and I'm watching a 60 Minutes piece that was done on him. This morning I listened to an hour-long podcast that he did when he was at the Sloan Conference with Michael Lewis back in 2019. Like, these things that, you know, we forget about how impactful certain people are in the sport. And Mike Leach, while his legacy, we don't want to say that it's over yet. I think it's a good time to remember just how impactful he's been and the amount of lives that he's impacted.
Yeah, I guess it's probably best to just kind of leave that there, because there's no reason to speculate, you know, or like what happens next with Mississippi State football. But, I mean, it does sound like for now, I know Zach Arnett has not ever been an interim coach or an interim head coach or a head coach in college football, but he's a good football mind. It's just he's on the, you know, Leach is the offensive guy and Arnett is a defensive guy. So, you know, and they've got a plan for a bowl game coming up here. So it's just, can't even imagine what it's like inside that athletic department that's still trying to hire an athletic director too.
Yeah, talk about a lot of moving pieces right now. I mean, just crazy to see this. And that was the first thing that when you saw yesterday that Zach Arnett had been named interim coach, you're like, wow, okay, this is not just a coach who's going in for, you know, a minor health scare or something like that. That kind of lets you know the seriousness of this and how quickly this has happened. And now a program that, like you said, is still trying to hire an athletic director and still trying to figure out what exactly these things are going to look like. It's going to have to turn to Zach Arnett. And Zach Arnett, in the time being, is going to be asked to do something that very few people in this profession are ever asked to do. And, you know, this is kind of one of those, you know, figure it out as you go type situations here. And it's going to be very interesting to see what develops from Mississippi State. But I know a lot of people right now are kind of waiting on bated breath to see what exactly the next step is with Mike Leach.
Looking at the transfer portal, was it Jacoby Criswell? What do you know about him?
That's a good question. So I'm still trying to catch up on transfer portal guys, to be honest with you. Like, that to me is like one of those things there. Like, when I see all these things actually get settled, that'll be a little bit of a different story. But if you played at North Carolina, you think, okay, you understand some of these modern concepts, what Phil Longo likes to do. Phil Longo now at Wisconsin, which is just a really weird fit with the type of offense that he's typically run. If you go back to what he was doing at Ole Miss, you know that that's a team that's going to throw the ball a ton. If your biggest thing is you weren't as good as Drake May, I don't really know a lot about you. I don't.
Yeah.
You can be great, and you know, like you can have an opportunity to succeed. But to me, yeah, that obviously makes a lot of sense, and it was pretty obvious that you were going to see a player of that caliber in that situation with Drake May coming back. It was pretty likely that you were going to see somebody like that want to leave. And now, obviously, Arkansas had a vacancy. They were going to be adding a portal guy no matter what, because the way this played out with Malik Hornsby going into the portal, KJ Jefferson coming back. So this isn't necessarily a situation where we're like, oh, hey, what's he going to do to challenge for the starting job? Like, you need depth, and getting somebody who was a four-star recruit who couldn't beat out Drake May for a starting job. There are opportunities that are going to be had there. It'll be interesting though, because obviously from the system that he came in, it's going to be very different to operate in the Kendall Briles offense compared to what he operated in before. But you like the fact that he has familiarity with spread concepts, and it's kind of one of those situations where you wait and see. And if you're Arkansas, you take a chance on somebody like that, and you hope to groom him along and become maybe the guy that can replace KJ.
Yeah, I mean, he backed up a guy who was now in the NFL, and Sam Howell, and then backs up the ACC Player of the Year. It's kind of a little difficult to break through, I think, in some cases here. Want to ask what you think about the hires that Hugh Freeze made at Auburn. Philip Montgomery will be the offensive coordinator, former Tulsa head coach. I think he'll make more money as the Auburn OC than he was making as the Tulsa head coach. And Ron Roberts, longtime defensive coordinator, most recently at Baylor. We'd read that Roberts might have interviewed for the Arkansas defensive coordinator job. So what do you make of these two hires?
Yeah, I'm really high on them. I am. And I think, the first and most important hire that Hugh Freeze had to make was making sure Cadillac Williams was still going to be on his staff, and him being able to do that kind of speaks to the success that he's had so far in assembling a staff. And we talked about that a lot with Sam Pittman. It was going to be, all right, well, what are you able to do in terms of hiring a staff, putting experienced guys around you, because that's what this job comes down to so much. And going on getting somebody like Philip Montgomery, who has a lot of experience in the Baylor offense, that's kind of the way the SEC is trending right now. I mean, there are different variations of it at places like obviously Arkansas and Ole Miss and Tennessee, and we're seeing all of these disciples of this offense. There are air raid principles to it, but obviously nobody's going to call that the air raid in the Mike Leach sense, so to speak. But I think that it allows you to operate kind of as a CEO if that's what Hugh Freeze wants to do. And that's what Tennessee does with Alex Golesh and Josh Heupel, and Alex Golesh is now at USF. But it kind of allows you to be the CEO, and that's what I think Freeze is going to look to do, and not necessarily be the primary play caller a la Jimbo Fisher, also trying to do that while juggling head coaching duties. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And then seeing somebody like Roberts, who before he worked under Dave Aranda was also working under Billy Napier, and turn around that Louisiana defense. I mean, they were a top 20 unit, just like that all of a sudden. I mean, they were outside of the top 100 in the country in year two. They really turned it around, had a much better year in 2019. He had total autonomy on that side of the ball. So somebody that is going to be really valued there, and would have been a nice fit probably at Arkansas, but he's going to get an opportunity to work with some pretty top end talent, I think, at Auburn with what they're going to be able to do in the portal. And it's a nice way for Hugh Freeze to kind of get things started after a very awkward introduction to his new digs at Auburn.
Connor, is there any chance the Big Ten was better than the SEC this year? They got two teams in the playoff. SEC has one. Looking at the breakdown of the All-America teams, Big Ten had 7. The SEC had 6. SEC did not have a finalist for the Heisman Trophy. I wonder what you think.
I think there are a couple of ways to look at it. There's a possibility that a Big Ten team wins a national championship this year. That's on the table, I think, and that's something that hasn't happened since 2014. I mean, after Ohio State won that first playoff championship, the Big Ten has won a total of 1 playoff game since then. So I think before we say the Big Ten was definitively the best conference in college football, I think we need to try and answer, are we talking about depth? Because from a depth standpoint, I mean, 3 teams in the top 25, and that's pretty much been it for most of the year. I mean, it's been Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, and then in some order, and that's pretty much been the extent of it. I mean, Penn State is going to a New Year's Six Bowl despite the fact it doesn't have a win against a team that's currently in the top 25 or anybody that's particularly close And I think that if you're going to knock the SEC for its depth for all these years that it had Alabama and everyone else, you kind of need to do the same with the Big Ten. I don't really know that the depth is there. I don't know that there's a ton of separation in the middle of the pack, and maybe that's kind of what's contributing to this. We'll play the results with bowl season, even though that's never been dumber to do that because we have all these opt-outs, we have all these coaching changes. So to me, in the portal and the way that it's set up, it doesn't really answer the question, in my opinion. Even if the Big Ten gets 2 teams in the national championship, that just means the Big Ten had better top-end talent than the SEC this year.
Yeah, I kind of wonder. I mean, do you ever look at it? So you say, all right, put Michigan against Georgia, put Ohio State against Alabama. I mean, they'll get a chance to play him maybe later on. Put Penn State against Tennessee. What about putting Northwestern against Vanderbilt or Rutgers against A&M this year? Is it more about the bottom, or is it really more about the top?
I mean, if we want to break down Rutgers, Andy, I'm here for it. Look, college football junkie, I watched that game. That's a Sickos committee game. I'd be all for it. There's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. More college football is better, but look, it's still going to be defined by how those top 3 or 4 teams do, and that's what this all comes down to. I'm more interested kind of in the playoff New Year's Six Bowl combination because that's usually, and I say usually somewhat loosely now, where you're seeing teams prepare with 4 weeks, and they usually have about their full roster, a chance to be able to get healthy. And to me, that's a little bit more indicative than trying to figure out if the 7th best team in the SEC was as good as the 4th best team in the Big Ten or whatever the case may be. We play the results, though. I kind of hate that. To me, I thought the SEC had more depth in the regular season than the Big Ten, just by virtue of having 10 different teams in the top 25, and the Big Ten had 4 or 5 or something. That number was really low for the Big Ten, at least in the playoff poll. So I think that, you can kind of twist it any way you want, and Lord knows Big Ten fans will if it ends up being a Michigan-Ohio State national championship.
Wouldn't that be fun, though? I'd be all for a Michigan-Ohio State championship. I think Georgia's still the best team out there, though.
Yeah, I agree. It would be fun. And look, I mean, there's something to be said for it. And Greg Sankey spoke about this at last year's national championship and the need for playoff expansion to get the sport more popular outside of the region. Because, yeah, I think a lot of people watched that Alabama-Georgia game last year. And, yeah, you might have been entertained by it, but did you have a rooting interest? Was it appointment viewing for those outside of the SEC? For the casual college football fan? Probably not. And they're probably thinking this is the same old. And, I think there's something to be said for having a different conference kind of have this moment because those have been so few and far between. I mean, you can poke holes in every other conference besides the SEC. I mean, the SEC is 12-3 in playoff games that aren't against each other. Right? There's a reason why we talk about the SEC in such a different way. And some say, oh, it's biased, it's whatever. It's no, it's because they get on this stage and they win football games. It's pretty simple. And outside of Clemson, I mean, it's been few and far between outside of the SEC. So there is something to be said for it. It would be something that would gravitate the college football landscape. There's no question about it. Definitely more than a rematch of Georgia and Michigan. But, yeah, I mean, until one of these Big Ten teams can actually break through and beat an SEC team in the playoff for the first time since 2014, I guess I just won't be holding my breath on that.
Well, we got an SEC Bowl game on Saturday. Bowl season starts Friday. The Vegas Bowl, Florida, Oregon State, Saturday. I saw Oregon State just locked up Jonathan Smith to a long-term contract. They're ranked 14th. Does Florida even know who their quarterback is going to be?
If there's ever a time, look, Arkansas fans know this all too well. Sometimes you just got to decide we're running wild hog, and they wouldn't call it that at Florida. They wouldn't do that. But they've got a couple of stud tailbacks in Montrell Johnson and Trevor Etienne, the brother of Travis Etienne. They could just do that all day, and I would have no problem with it whatsoever. I think that their quarterback situation is looking dire right now. It's really, really bad. And so, yeah, I mean, you look at a game like this, and you're kind of wondering, man, is this going to be like what LSU was in the bowl game last year, where LSU had 39 scholarship players in that game, and they had a wide receiver playing quarterback? Florida could have some similar vibes to it, and we'll kind of wait and see what exactly Billy Napier announces for the quarterback and how all that's going to look. But, yeah, against an Oregon State team that's been really good this year and just beat Oregon, had that nice comeback. Jonathan Smith, man, what what a coach he's turned out to be. You could make a case that if you went back and looked at all the different coaching hires after the 2017 season in that cycle, Jonathan Smith might be the best one of all of them, which included Dan Mullen and Jimbo Fisher and Mario Cristobal and all these different guys. Jonathan Smith has become one of the better coaches in college football. So good to see that Oregon State locked him up, and maybe should have agreed to a contract after he beats Florida convincingly in a bowl game.
Football is back, and BetOnline remains your number one source for all your football betting needs this season. You'll find the latest odds, matchup info, player news, and game trends. And as your continued source for all sports wagering info, BetOnline features live betting, free contests, live scores, and giveaways all season long. Always the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports and events like MLB, MMA, tennis, boxing, and even golf. Head to betonline.ag to join and receive your 100% welcome bonus with your first deposit. Make sure to use the promo code BELIEVE to receive your rewards. That's BLEAV. Bet online, where the game starts.